Professor Marion Koopmans is part of the WHO team who's travelled to China and one of the authors of this report. Ms. Koopmans, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Anyways, yes.
From the Netherlands. Okay, if there is agreement, it seems, among many countries, in this instance at least, there seems to be a perception that the WHO in many ways was had. I want you to listen to the senior White House advisor, Andy Slavitt, on Tuesday. Here he is.
I think we have to understand the methodology of that report better. Were the investigators who wrote the report given complete access to everything? Were they in any way influenced by the government in China when they wrote this report? Until we know the answers to those questions, I think it's best that we view the report with some healthy skepticism.
Would you like to answer those questions that Andy Slavitt posed just then?
Sure. Well, I think that skepticism and this opinion was already circulating before the report ever came out. And that is a concern from a group that feels the virus came from a lab and that needs to be investigated. Now, what we did is work with our Chinese colleagues to collect, discuss, aggregate, analyze all the information that is available based on a long list of studies that were done. And that's not an inspection, that's not an audit, it's a joint study. I think there's some misunderstanding about how this was set up. And did we discuss the possibility of a laboratory leak? Yes, we did, with all the labs that were involved in the early response. We were there, we visited them, we discussed the biosecurity, we discussed their programs of work, the training of their staff, the testing of their staff, and we did not find any indication or a lead for further follow-up. But what we do say is, of course, if there are these accusations, particularly from the US, keep coming, it would be good if there is real evidence to share that with WHO so it can be followed up.
On the issue with the staff at the lab at Wuhan, I find this interesting because throughout, not just this particular global pandemic, but for generations, it seems, for decades, China has a history of covering up, of lying, of obfuscating, and of being less than transparent and just simply not telling the truth. Why were they given the benefit of the doubt on the situation with the lab? Why were we taking them at their word?
Well, we were discussing all of this like we do with scientific colleagues. This is how we approach this with joint studies among scientists, where if we see data, we get presentations, we discuss them, we analyze them, we scrutinize them, and then we say, okay, yes, we share the conclusions. That's how it was done.
So,
and of course, if you say, but I don't believe you, yeah, then that ends all discussion. And again, that's not how this was done. So then you need an inspection or something.
Yeah, if I could just jump in. So what in this report can you point to as some kind of new piece of evidence, new revelation, some kind of, breakthrough in this investigation? If you like, I know it wasn't an investigation, it was a report, but what did you actually get by going there to China that was worth risking the credibility of the WHO for? Because that seems to be what's happened here. So what was the payoff here? Because there was always going to be a risk to credibility the way this was set up. What did you guys get that we didn't know before?
Well, what we got was, for people that read the report, they'll see that there were at least 8 separate studies with extensive new data collection on surveillance data from people, mortality analysis going back to September in Wuhan and Hubei province, the extensive testing of animals and molecular analysis, and combined that gives a much deeper, better view of where the pandemic really started off in Wuhan. That was throughout December. no evidence for earlier cases, at least not widespread, but clear leads to where you could do the next step studies. That's
So just to boil that down, what you're saying is that what we did learn by going to China, what you guys learned and are now telling us, is that we can definitively say that this began in December and not before.
Not widespread, so you cannot really. It's very difficult to find a small cluster, so that's the next step. And we discussed with the blood banks in Hubei, and they have samples stored that now will be available for further studies. Widespread, just to see if there's here or there just a handful of cases.
Just
And
very quickly.
the reason for that is you really need the first cases, the first possible cases for interviews to get clues on the earliest steps.
And just very quickly, was that information, was that worth what the battering to the reputation that the WHO is now taking?
I think it is. The battering is not from all over the world. It's somewhat selective. So
13 countries.
The EU has issued a very different statement. So, yes, I do think it is. It is important that we learn from these things. Emerging diseases can happen anywhere. And it is good to really dig down and try to reconstruct what happened.
Professor, thank you so much. I really appreciate your patience and your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, emotional and heartbreaking testimony on Tuesday from a number of witnesses in the trial of the police officer charged with killing George Floyd. Derek Chauvin is accused of killing Floyd last year by kneeling on his neck for more than 9 minutes during an arrest. In court,